You're watching the MMA Oracles podcast, and now, presenting your host, Jack Moon.
What's up, everyone? I am your host, Jack Moon. This is the first episode of the new MMA Oracles podcast, and I am excited to get started here. The first fight card of the year, UFC Fight Night 234, will be going down this Saturday. It is headlined by a rematch between Magomed Ankalaev and Johnny Walker. The UFC has been off for 4 weeks, so I am excited to get back into it, and I'm just going to dive straight into the card with the first fight of the night, which is a flyweight bout between the debuting Felipe Bunes, and he is taking on Joshua Van, who is stepping in here on somewhat short notice for the injured Denise Bondar. So this is a pretty big switch in styles for Bunes, as Bondar was a submission grappler. Now he's taken on mainly a striker in Joshua Van, who's got some slick striking and good boxing. So he's going to have to make that adjustment. But he's had enough time to do so. So this is a pretty good fight. Bunes is stepping into the UFC. He's 13-6 overall. He went 2-1 in LFA and 1-3 in ACA. He does have a win over former Ultimate Fighter contestant Yoni Sherbatov, which is probably his best win to date. He caught him with I believe it was a flying triangle in the first round. Let me take a look. Flying triangle armbar, 4 minutes and 8 seconds into round one. So that shows you somewhat of Bunes' style there. He's got a wild style. He's mainly a submission fighter. But he's already 34 years old, so I don't see a lot of upside on bringing him into the UFC at this point. He is entertaining, which is what they're looking for in the flyweight division, so it makes sense to a degree. But at 34 years old, I'm not sure how much he's going to be able to contribute to the division at this point. He does have a good team behind him at Pitbull Brothers, so we'll have to see how he looks in his debut. He is taking on Joshua Van, who is only 22 years old, and he's looked very impressive so far during his time in the UFC. He is 2-0 so far. He trains at 4 Ounce Fight Club with head coach and owner Daniel Pineda, which is a decent camp. But he's scored wins in the UFC so far over Zhalgas Zhumagulov and Kevin Borjas. The Zhumagulov win was a split decision, and the Borjas win was a unanimous decision. He got hurt in that in the fight against Kevin Borjas. He got hurt in the first round. He was rocked. Borjas had him in all sorts of trouble, and there was some fight IQ issues that I noticed there. Him being a younger fighter, he just started. He was looking to trade instead of recovering. He was looking to get his shots back and not really clinching up, not grappling, but he did well to avoid taking any bigger shots. He was able to show that he has a great chin. He recovered in between rounds and really took over from that point on. He's got really slick striking, good shots to the body, great boxing, and for a young fighter to be able to attack at all levels like that, landing to the body, that's very impressive to see. His striking looks like it could take him very far in this division. We haven't seen his grappling be tested yet, so this is an interesting matchup. I'm a little bit skeptical about how he'll hold up, but so far we have seen him defend takedowns. His takedown defense looked pretty good. That fight IQ worries me. I hope he doesn't spend too long grappling with Bunes. The game plan I expect to see him deploy would be to just win the striking exchanges, stay away from the grappling and clinch, shut down the takedowns. If he does get to the floor, get back to the feet and sort of rinse and repeat. Keep beating Bunes up on the feet and keep making him work, shutting down those takedowns, tire him out. Maybe go for a late stoppage. I'm thinking more along the lines of this one is going to the judges' scorecards. Looks like Van is the favorite despite coming in here on short notice. He is a minus 220 favorite. Bunes is debuting as a plus 180 underdog. I'm going with the odds makers on this one. I'm sticking with Van. He's looked very good. He's got a ton of potential at only 22 years old. Bunez, he's pretty much lost to any notable competition that he's faced. He lost 3 straight in ACA. All of those fighters were pretty solid fighters that he faced. It almost looks like that win over Yoni Sherbatov was a bit of a fluke. And then he ended up losing to Hussier Formiga in LFA as well. So no shame in that loss. Formiga is a top contender, but it hasn't shown anything. I haven't seen anything from him to show that he's ready to be in the UFC and competing with a guy like Van, who, despite being younger and having less experience, has really shown more in his short time. He's looking fantastic, and I expect big things from Van in the future. So I am picking him here to win in the first fight of the night. I will take Joshua Van by unanimous decision. And we're moving on to the second fight of the night. This is a lightweight fight between Tom Big Train Nolan and Nicholas Iron Mota. This is a decent fight here. Tom Nolan is making his UFC debut. He is a Contender Series contract winner. He is undefeated currently at 6-0. He also had an amateur record of 6-1. So the experience gap isn't as big as it may seem. Nolan is also a huge lightweight. He is 6'3". He's going to have a 5.5-inch reach advantage in this fight. He has shown that he can use that reach advantage pretty well. He can control distance, and he's really improving and coming into his own. He's finished his last 4 fights in a row, all by knockout. 3 of those 4 in the first round. He's been facing better and better competition as well. When he was 3-0, he took on a fighter who was 7-1, knocked him out in the second round. He was at 4-0 at that point. He fought a fighter who was 9-6, knocked him out in the first round. And then on the Contender Series, he fought Bogdan Grad, who was 11-1, and he knocked him out 1 minute and 23 seconds into the first round. He's still a bit unproven. We only did get to see 1 minute and 23 seconds of him on the Contender Series. Would have liked to seen him a little bit more, but that's not his fault that he is just starching opponents early. So he's looking great at this point. He doesn't have the greatest team behind him. He is at Team Compton Training Center. He seems to be a bit of a big fish in a small pond there, but that works for some fighters. With the smaller teams, if you're the best fighter there, the coaches are going to focus on you the most. So that really could work out in his favor. We haven't seen any negative effects of that yet. He could benefit from training with some bigger names, bigger camps, more skilled fighters. But as of right now, he's looking great. So there's not really a need for him to change anything up. On the other side, Mota is currently 1-2 in the UFC with a no contest. He really should be 1-3. That last no contest came in his last fight against Trey Ogden. It was a bit of a weird situation. Trey Ogden dominated him in the first 2 rounds. And the third round, Ogden got him in a submission. The referee thought that Mota was out and ended up stopping the fight. Due to that referee error, did get called a no contest. I would have liked to have seen it kind of just go to a decision from that point because Trey Ogden kind of got robbed out of a win there. He was really dominating that fight up until that point. And Mota was lucky to escape with the no contest instead of a loss. So he could be on his last legs here, being that he really should be 1-3 in the UFC. He's going to need a win. His back is against the wall in this one. He's had a rough go so far in the UFC. He debuted against Jim Miller, which is kind of an odd opponent for him to debut against. Jim Miller is a veteran of the sport, has been around for a long time, fought the who's who of the division. I don't know why you would put a debuting fighter against Jim Miller, but that's how it went. And Jim Miller ended up knocking him out in the second round. Mota did then rebound with a knockout win of his own over Cameron Van Camp, who has since been cut. But then he was KO'd by Manuel Torres after that. So This is a good matchup for him because he's getting another striker. Mota likes to strike himself. He's kind of a brawler. He will go in there and take one to land one. Hasn't really worked out for him so far in the UFC. So this fight should at least be entertaining for however long it lasts. Both fighters have a ton of pressure on him here. Nolan's undefeated. He's making his UFC debut. There's the potential for UFC jitters. We don't know how he's going to perform under the bright lights in the UFC. So uh, I do pump the brakes on him a little bit for that reason. And then Mota, his back is against the wall. He has to have this win, or he's likely going to be cut. So a lot of pressure on both fighters for this fight. Mota does have a good team behind him at Extreme Couture, so he could be a live underdog. He's really up against it, but he's got the motivation and the right team to get this done. If he really sets his mind to it and goes in there and fights smart. Um, I don't see that happening. We haven't really seen that in the past from him, and that's why the odds makers currently have Tom Nolan as a minus 290 favorite and Nicholas Mota at a plus 235 underdog. I am going with the odds makers again on this one. I've liked what I've seen from Nolan so far. He's got good counters. He's using his range well. I've seen improvement from him from fight to fight. And I think this is a good stylistic matchup for him. Mota is going to be forced to come forward and try and close the distance. And I think that Tom Nolan is going to be able to catch him. He's got good counters. He controls range well, and he's going to give Mota a lot of problems there. I think Nolan puts him away early. With those odds, I avoid it mostly because he's a little bit too heavily favored at 290. If you throw him into a parlay, it might be worth it, but with him being unproven and the UFC debut, I pump the brakes there a little bit. But my pick is still Tom Nolan by first round knockout. And we're into the third fight of the night. This is a featherweight pairing between Weston Wilson and John Lord Assassin Silva. Silva stepping in here on somewhat short notice to replace Gabriel Santos, who was forced to withdraw. And he's taking on Wilson, who is currently 0-1 in the UFC and needs a win here to avoid being on the chopping block. Wilson got his opportunity in the UFC due to a late notice opportunity himself. He stepped in on short notice and took on Joanderson Brito in his UFC debut. He is currently 34 years old, and I don't really see him being a UFC caliber fighter. He is 16-8 overall. The only notable fighters he's ever faced in his career was Teruto Ishihara and the aforementioned Joanderson Brito, both of whom knocked him out in the opening round. So besides that, the opponents he's beaten have a current combined record of 87 and 144. So you could see that the level of competition he's faced has been extremely low. Anytime he's stepped up and fought better fighters, they've gotten him out of there pretty quickly. I think Wilson only really got this opportunity in the UFC because he trains with Upstate Karate with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And he has a somewhat exciting style. He's got some karate style striking, but he's finished actually most of his fights with his grappling. He's got 16 wins. All of them have been finishes, actually. 5 knockouts and 11 submissions. So he is a fighter that will go out there and either get the win or go out on his shield trying. So at least he's going to put on some entertainment, but really, I don't see him getting any wins in the UFC. Silva is making his debut here. He is a Contender Series winner. He is currently 11-2 overall, and he's only 27 years old. He's coming off a big win on the Contender Series over Kevin Vallejos, and that was the best opponent that that Silva had faced at that point, and he ended up going to decision. Silva is a bit of a finisher himself, as he has stopped, looks like 10 of his 11 pro wins, with Vallejos being the only one to take him to a decision. So this is an interesting fight for that reason. Silva, he hasn't shown that he can he's shown that he can run through lower end guys, but when he took a step up in competition, he did struggle a bit and had to go the full 15 minutes. He's only 27 though, and he's got a great team behind him at Fighting Nerds. He's still constantly improving, and I don't really consider Weston Wilson a step up in competition for him. I think this is kind of a step back. I think Kevin Vallejos is probably a better fighter than Weston Wilson, so um, it makes sense that Silva is such a large favorite coming in here, even on short notice. The odds makers currently have Silva at minus 800 and Wilson as a plus 550 underdog. That's a huge favorite for Silva in his debut. I think anything less than a first round knockout is going to be a disappointment for him. But I think he's going to get it. I think he's going to get it. Wilson is the type of fighter that, like I said, to give him an all action type of fight and go out there and try and get the win for himself. But he just doesn't have the skills or the chin to make that happen. I think Silva's going to land some big shots early and put him away. So my pick is Jean Silva by first round knockout. And we are on to the fourth fight of the night. This is probably my favorite fight on the entire card. It is a bantamweight pairing between ferocious Farid Basharat and Taylor Double Impact Lapalus. Both fighters are prospects on the verge of a breakout at this point. Basharat's undefeated. He's 11-0. He's got a great team behind him at Extreme Couture. He's only 26 years old. He's continuing to improve. He's getting better and better with each fight. His best win currently is over Damon Blackshear in his UFC debut, at least in my opinion. He's also beaten Clayton Rodriguez in his second outing in the UFC, but this is most definitely the biggest test of his career so far. Really, he faced a pretty low level of competition up until he got to the Contender Series. 4 out of the 5 of his first opponents had 0 wins, so he's I'm not knocking him. He is very impressive as a prospect. He's looked great so far. He was impressive on the Contender Series. He's been impressive in the UFC. He is well rounded. He looks great everywhere. But this is a big step up against Taylor Lapalus, who is 31 years old. He really needs to make something happen now if he wants to make a run up the division. He's got a great team behind him as well at the MMA Factory, and he is 19-3 overall. So he definitely has more experience. He also has more experience against higher level fighters. He currently holds wins over Ulka Sasaki, Josh Hill, Nate Matus, Marcus Breno, Wilson Reyes, Damarte Pena, and Khalid Lawford in his UFC return. He actually left the UFC in 2016. He was here before, uh, but he left on a win. He left on a win over Leandro Issa. He was 3-1 in the promotion when he left. His only loss was to Eric Perez, who at the time was on fire. So no shame in that. I see this being a really close fight no matter where it goes. Lapalus is skilled. He's a high level grappler, but that's going to be hard to get off against Basharat. Basharat is probably the better wrestler, so this is a close fight, but it's going to be a big test for Basharat. If Basharat, especially if he could dominate the way he has been against Lapalus, he's going to be looked at as a future contender, and it could get complicated because his brother is also a future contender in this division. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. Basharat is probably the better offensive fighter in this fight. He throws more volume on the feet. He's more accurate with his strikes, and like I mentioned, he is the better wrestler of the two. But Lapalus is very very sound defensively. He doesn't take a lot of damage. He's good at blocking shots. He's good at picking his own shots. And he's probably the better like submission specialist grappler on the floor. So if this fight does go to the floor, which Basharat does like to control his opponents with his wrestling, it could get pretty interesting. The odds makers currently have Basharat at a minus 250 favorite and Lapilus at plus 205 underdog. I don't like those odds at all. I see this being a razor thin fight. I expect it probably to go to a decision, and I could see it going either way. I'm still favoring the favorite in Basharat as he is the better offensive fighter. The scoring is favoring offense, but it wouldn't shock me at all to see Lapis pull off this upset. Like I mentioned, he has faced the much better level of competition. Basharat at this point, his hype is a little bit inflated. He hasn't really beaten anyone that's that great. Damon Blackshear being his best win. Uh, Lapis really could pull off a big upset here to start the year. So he's got that experience advantage. He's going to be a real problem if Basharat overlooks him, as I'm thinking the odds makers are. He will definitely pay for that. But with the scoring favoring offense, I see Basharat being able to keep Lapis in a bit of a defensive shell. He throws more volume, so Lapis is going to kind of block those shots, stay on the defense, stay on the back foot, and Basharat will be able to control him with the wrestling, push him against the fence, clinch him, maintain top control, and just edge out the rounds ever so slightly. My pick is Fareed Basharat to win a unanimous decision. And we are into the fifth fight of the night. This is another bantamweight matchup here. This one between Marcus the Maniac McGee and Gaston the Dream Killer Bolanos. Don't blink, someone's likely getting knocked out in this one. These fighters have a combined 15 pro wins with 13 knockouts and 1 submission. So they don't like seeing the judges' scorecards, and that's just going to be a treat for the fans. I see this one having either a performance of the night bonus or a fight of the night bonus if the fight doesn't get stopped. McGee is a guy I've underestimated. I still somewhat doubt him. He's already 33 years old. There's not a ton of upside there, especially in the very deep bantamweight division. But he does have a great team behind him at the MMA lab, so he should be well prepared for this fight. He's currently 8-1 overall. He's 2-0 in the UFC. He's got wins over Journey Newson in his debut, which he submitted him, and then he followed that up with a knockout over JP Buys. His best win is probably the one over Newson. He didn't really fight very good competition before coming to the UFC, which is why I was underestimating him. And he proved me wrong by defeating Journey Newson. I picked him against Buys, but the Newson win is probably his best win, and that's not saying a lot because Journey Newson wasn't great in the UFC and has since been cut. On the other side, Bolanos, he's a little bit younger at 31, but he's also been a little bit less reliable. He is 7-3 overall. He's 1-0 in the UFC. He was 6-3 in Bellator before that. Fought his whole career in Bellator. But really, Bellator was having him fight bottom of the barrel guys. His best win was in his UFC debut. He defeated Aaron Phillips by unanimous decision. Aaron Phillips is another guy that's not that great. So both of these guys really haven't beaten the best competition. They have a lot to prove here. That they actually still belong and can compete. And I'm leaning towards McGee, mainly because I see him being the better defensive fighter. I think this is going to be a wild fight. Both guys are going to be looking for that knockout. And with McGee having better defense, I think he'll be able to kind of avoid some damage and deal out more damage in the process. The odds makers seem to agree with me as they have McGee as a minus 280 favorite and Bolanos is sitting at a plus 225 underdog. Those odds are a little bit steep because I really could see Bolanos getting it done. He did fight in Bellator, so technically I would say he's probably fought better competition, but not very much better. Both guys are kind of an unknown at this point. The best thing I can say is McGee has that team behind him at the MMA lab, and he's got the better defense. So I think that he's going to be able to land his shots and avoid taking the shots of Bolanos, which is why I am picking Marcus McGee by knockout in the first round. Next up, we have a welterweight pairing between Matthew Semi the Jedi Semmelsberger versus Preston Pressure Parsons. Semmelsberger stepping in on somewhat short notice, and this is a big risk for him as he's fighting a fighter who's below him in the rankings right now, and he desperately needs a win. In 2023, Semmelsberger went 0-2 in two fights that he had in the UFC. He was knocked out in his last fight by Uros Medic, and he had lost a decision before that. He's 11-6 overall, so his record already looks bad. But his best win currently in his career is a decision over Jake Matthews, which was a big win for him. On the other side, Preston Parsons, he's currently 1-2 in the UFC, and he may need a win to stay on the roster. Parsons, he had some early career win. He had an early career notable win over Ignacio Bahamondes, and he scored a win over Evan Elder in the UFC. Those are his best wins there, and all four of his losses have come to high-level guys. He lost to Mike Perry, Valdir Araujo, Daniel Rodriguez, and Trevin Giles. So, nothing to be ashamed of there. Those are all high-level guys that he lost to. So Parsons is a bit underrated, in my opinion. I'm still giving Semmelsberger the edge in this matchup. He's a big fighter. He's a great athlete. He's great offensively. And like I mentioned earlier, he is ranked higher. He has fought the better competition. He's shown that he can compete against higher level guys than Parsons has at this point. But he is so frustratingly inconsistent. Even though he's a great athlete, it hasn't exactly translated into his fights. He has bad fight IQ, bad defense. He's great offensively, but he puts himself into bad positions because he's getting a little bit wild. He's really been looking for one-shot knockouts lately instead of setting things up and putting things together, and it has really cost him. And I would imagine that's what he's going to be going for again here. Coming in on short notice, he's probably going to want to get Parsons out of there quick. And if he doesn't do so, this could turn into a long night for him. The odds are currently sitting with Semmelsberger as a minus 125 favorite and Parsons as a plus 105 underdog. Semmelsberger has lost to fighters that he really should have beat multiple times. In his last fight, he was knocked out by Uros Medic, who was a lightweight moving up to welterweight. Semmelsberger was the favorite in that matchup as well. He really should have won that fight. But because of his lack of defense and his tendency to get wild, he ended up getting caught with a spinning back fist and knocked out. He also dropped a unanimous decision to Alex Morono a while back. And if you just look at those two guys, Semmelsberger is obviously the better athlete. I think if you put them competing in about any other sport, Semmelsberger would probably win. But Morono was able to beat him up on the feet and pick his shots, and Semmelsberger just never got anything together in that fight. And that's a huge problem for him going forward. The fight IQ, the defense, just putting it all together is his problem right now. He's a great athlete, and he's got the weapons to finish fights. He just needs to kind of settle down and round out his game, I think. I am going to go ahead and pick Matthew Semmelsberger for this fight. 2 out of 4 of Parsons' losses are by knockout, and Semmelsberger usually starts pretty quick, and he's got good accuracy early. He's rocked a lot of fighters, even in some of these fights that he's lost, like the one against Jeremiah Wells. He was able to hurt him, and then he let the fight slip away. But I think if he hurts Parsons early, he'll be able to get him out of there. Otherwise, we could see him win the first round and lose the second two, and Parsons could pull off the upset. My official pick, though, will be Matthew Semmelsberger by knockout in the first round. And we've arrived at the preliminary card headliner. This is a heavyweight bout between Andre the Pitbull Arlovsky and Waldo Salsa Boy Cortez Acosta. It's a big fight for both fighters, but for very different reasons. Andre Arlovsky is 34 and 22 overall. He's 44 years old, and he's coming off a pair of losses. Both were finishes against Marcos Rogerio de Lima, who submitted him, and in his last fight, he was knocked out by Dontale Mays. On the other side, we have Waldo Cortez Acosta, who is currently 3-1 in the UFC. He is 32 years old, and he is coming off a knockout win over Lucas Bresky. Arlovsky has had multiple late career resurgences before. We've seen it where he looks like he is completely done. He's taking multiple losses in a row, only for him to turn things around and get back almost to title contention. I don't know if I see that happening again here, but he's a fighter that can never be counted out, and he's proved that multiple times. Cortez Acosta, on the other hand, he looks like a good prospect. Prospects in the heavyweight division usually don't look that skilled. They're usually more power punchers who have just been finding knockouts. Uh, but I think Cortez Acosta is kind of the opposite of that. He actually looks pretty skilled. He's got some good boxing technique, but he hasn't shown a ton of power. He doesn't just swing for the fences. He actually sets things up and lands in combination, which is a good change up for the heavyweight division. Despite him being a huge favorite, this would be easily the biggest win of his career. He is 3-1 in the UFC, but he's only beaten Jared Vanderaa, Chase Sherman, and Lucas Bresky. Vanderaa is no longer on the roster. I'm not sure Chase Sherman's even on the roster. I know he's been cut once before. And Bresky looks like he has one foot out the door. I did just see he was booked for a fight, but it looks like a fight he's going to lose and most likely be cut afterwards. So this is a big test for Cortez Acosta, and I'm actually surprised to see him as such a large favorite. The odds makers currently have Cortez Acosta at minus 600 and Arlovsky as plus 430 as an underdog. He's going to have to really go in and beat Arlovsky at his own game. Arlovsky developed this style late in his career where he went away from the power punching and he started winning rounds based off of just technical skill. He would never let his opponents get set. He would kind of offset them with his striking, and he would mix things up with some grappling and kicks and control the range from the outside. And he developed a sort of just a crafty ringsmanship later in his career that allowed him to win rounds. It wasn't exciting like we used to see from Arlovsky, where he would just one punch guys, but it was effective. So if Arlovsky looks to get back to that, this could be a chess match. It really could be, and it could go to the decision. We have seen Cortez Acosta go to decision more often than not. He's only finished 6 of his 10 wins. 5 of those are by knockout, and 1 of them is by submission. He's got 4 decision wins, and his lone loss is by decision. So really, his other 2 wins over Chase Sherman and Lucas Bresky in the UFC were both decision victories as well. So this is a big step up in competition. I wouldn't be surprised if Arlovsky pulls it off, or if he even forces Cortez Acosta to just not look very good, and it goes to a rather lackluster decision, and Cortez Acosta still comes out with the win. That wouldn't shock me either. I did like the uptick in offense that I saw from Cortez Acosta in his last outing, where he knocked out Lucas Bresky in the first round. I want to see more of that here. This is a big opportunity for him. He's fighting the biggest name of his career. He's on the prelim headliner. A lot of eyes are going to be on him. It's going to be a lot of pressure, but I want to see Waldo Cortez Acosta really step up here. I want to see him go for it, and I think he can do it. If he puts his foot on the gas and really goes after Arlovsky, I think he can get the finish early. I think Arlovsky, at this point, I've thought he was done before, but I think Father Time is finally catching up to him. For him to get knocked out by Mays in his last fight, I think that was a bad look, and I think it's kind of made me lose all confidence in him. So my pick is Waldo Cortez Acosta by knockout in the first round. Kicking off the main card will be a middleweight pairing between Phil Hawes and Bruno the Hulk Vajeda. This is going to be a great fight. I expect someone to get knocked out early here, so don't blink. Make sure you don't miss this one. And has performance of the night bonus written all over it. Hawes is 12-5 overall. He's got a great team behind him at Killcliff FC, and he is 35 years old. On the other side, Fajeda is 31. He is 10-1 overall. He's also got a solid team behind him as well that I'm not even going to try and pronounce, but it's a solid team that he has behind him as well. He is both fighters are coming off losses, so they have their backs to the wall, and they do need a win here. Fajeda had won on the Contender Series, and he debuted with a huge upset win, knocking out Gregory Rodriguez. It looked like Fajeda may just be a new contender in the division, and then he ended up taking on a short notice opponent in Nursultan Ruzaboev, who ended up knocking him out. So he's 1-1, and we kind of don't know where he stands at this point. He got knocked out. Ruzaboev is no joke. Even though he came in on short notice, I was glad to see him get added to the UFC roster, and it's not a shame to lose to him at all. So Fajeda has no shame in that loss, but he definitely needs to get back in the win column. He did get beaten up pretty bad in that fight, and he needs to kind of erase that from people's memories and let him know that he is still looking to be a contender in this division. On the other side, Hawes is 2-3 in his last 5. All 3 of those losses have been knockouts. And he's coming off a pair of knockout losses. At 35 years old, his chin just doesn't seem to be holding up anymore. It was never that great to begin with, so that is a bad sign going against a guy named the Hulk, who's going to be looking to come in there and just smash his opponent. Phil Hawes, he's a great athlete. He's explosive. He's got a great team behind him, so he's a guy that really can't be counted out. He's got that one-shot power himself. There's definitely a chance that he could just, land a shot on Fajeda and put him away before Fajeda can even get anything going. But I really don't see that happening. At 35, 2 losses, I think we see Phil Hawes get knocked out again here and maybe even cut from the UFC roster. Hate to say it, Phil Hawes is an exciting fighter, but it seems like he's got one foot out the door. Fajeda, it looks like the guy to put that final nail in the coffin. Odds makers somewhat agree. Fajeda is a minus 125 favorite at the moment, and it looks like Hawes is a plus 105 underdog. So they see it as a pick 'em, and my pick is definitely going to be on the Fajeda side. I think he's going to really just smash Phil Hawes at this point. He's younger, he's more aggressive. I think he can kind of take the shot from Phil Hawes to land his own, and I don't think Phil Hawes can do the same thing. I think if Phil Hawes gets hit, it's going to be over, and he's not going to be able to take one to return one. And I don't see him kind of avoiding all of the shots when Fajeda's just going to come after him and be swinging for the fences. Give me Bruno Fajeda by first round knockout. Next up on the main card, we have a bantamweight pairing between Ricky Simone and Mario Batista. This is a big fight for the bantamweight division as Ricky Simone is currently ranked number 13. So this is a chance for Mario Batista to sort of usurp him and take his place in the top 15 and start to make a run at the title. For Simone, he is going to have to hold off Batista to secure his place among the top 15 and get back on track and trying to get to the title himself. Batista has the momentum right now. He is on a 5-fight winning streak, while Simone is coming off a loss to Yadong Song. This is a big step up for Batista, though. Even though he's on that 5-fight winning streak, his last fight was against Damon Blackshear. So fighting a lower end fighter like that and then jumping all the way up to a top 15 opponent, it's going to be a large gap for him. And I don't know if he's going to be able to cover that gap. Let me see here. Simone is currently 20-4 overall. He is 31 years old, and he has some good wins in his last 5 fights. He's got notable wins over Brian Kelleher, Rafael Sunsao, and Jack Shore, the previously undefeated Jack Shore, who he submitted. So that was a huge win for Simone. Uh, and really, Batista's never fought anyone of that caliber. He, in his last 5 fights, he's got notable wins, I'd say, over Damon Blackshear and Brian Kelleher as well. Other than that, he was fighting the Benito Lopez fight was Benito Lopez was good, but I believe Benito Lopez returned from a long layoff for that fight, and then he beat Guido Canetti after that, who was 10-6. And before that, to start this run, he beat Jay Perrin, who was 10-4. So really, I'm seeing this as a huge step up for Batista. He's looked very good in his UFC career, don't get me wrong, and he's got a great team behind him at the MMA lab. But I think this is just going to be a different level of competition than he's used to. Batista, he does have the tools to be competitive in this fight. He is the better striker, and he's got dangerous submissions. But Simone is just too good defensively. He's got smothering wrestling, and I think the pressure that Simone is going to put on him, he's going to be able to. I don't think he'll break Batista, but he'll definitely be able to control him enough to win the rounds. I just think that Simone will be all over him. The odds makers have it as a pick 'em currently. Simone is sitting at a minus 165 favorite, and Batista is at a plus 140 underdog. I like that line for Simone. I think Simone is one of my locks for the night. I see him winning this by decision, and I will end up most likely throwing Simone into a parlay as well with another lock on this card, especially with those odds. My official pick for this fight is Ricky Simone by unanimous decision. Next up on the main card, we have a lightweight fight between two veterans of the sport in Jim Miller and Gabriel Benitez. This is a really interesting pairing. On Miller's side, he is currently 36-17. He is 4-1 over his last 5. That lone loss was a decision to Alexander Hernandez, but he has since rebounded in his last fight with a knockout over Jesse Butler, who really shouldn't have been fighting. Benitez is 2-3 over his last 5, and he is coming off a knockout win as well over Charlie Ontiveros. Both guys are coming off wins over lower end fighters. Both guys are older veterans of the sport. And I see Miller being pretty heavily favored, especially by the fans in this one. But Benitez is a guy that has been consistently underestimated in his career. He's got a great team behind him at American Kickboxing Academy, and he is very dangerous. I would call him a live underdog. It seems like the odds makers agree with me there. They have this as a pick 'em with Jim Miller being a minus 120 favorite and Benitez being the plus 100 underdog. Miller's been actually talking a lot lately about UFC 300, as I believe he has fought at 100, 200, and now he will fight at 300. And he was talking about making UFC 300 his retirement fight, but he did just recently come out and say he has plans to keep fighting past that now. So I don't like him looking that far ahead. He's got a very tough fight ahead of him here in Gabriel Benitez. And if he is overlooking him at all, Benitez will absolutely make him pay. Benitez, like I said, is a fighter that is consistently underestimated, but he's also frustratingly inconsistent. He loses fights to guys that you think he should crush, and then he's had competitive fights against guys that he really shouldn't have been competitive against. He's a guy that's sort of hard to put your finger on. Uh, Benitez, what I'm seeing from him lately, though, is that his chin hasn't been holding up. He's 35 years old. He's 23-10 overall, and he's been knocked out in 2 of his last 3 losses. So it's not a good look going against Miller, who has been more aggressive with his striking lately and has actually won 3 of his last 4 by knockout. So this is a good fight. It really is. Benitez has the tools to be competitive no matter where it goes, but with him, it seems like even though Miller's older, Benitez is the one that's slowing down more, and he's got less durability, and I think Miller's going to put it on him. Give me Jim Miller to win by probably TKO in the second round. In the co-main event of the evening, we do have a rematch at flyweight between Matthias Nicolau and Manal Cap. This is the second time they will be fighting. The first one was just about over 2.5 years ago. Nicolau won that fight by split decision, but many people thought it was a bit of a robbery. Cap has the momentum. Currently, he hasn't lost since. He's got 4 straight wins, while Nicolau is coming off a loss by knockout to Brandon Royval. Both fighters are top contenders in this division. The winner is going to move on and will most likely be in the title picture, probably 1, maybe 2 fights away from a title shot. Both fighters have great teams behind them. Nova Uniao is representing Matthias Nicolau, and Manal Cap is backed by Extreme Couture. Cap has the striking edge. He's definitely the more offensive-minded fighter. He throws more volume. He's more accurate with his strikes, and he has more power in his strikes as well. Especially for a flyweight, Manel Cap is a knockout artist. Nicolau is the better wrestler, though. But we've seen Cap have solid takedown defense, at least in the past. Nicolau is the better grappler as well, so if the fight does get into those grappling and wrestling exchanges, it will probably favor Nicolau. In their previous fight, Nicolau was able to start strong. He had 2 minutes and 24 seconds of control time in the first round, but he was only able to manage 7 seconds combined of control time after that, combined in the second and third round. So he really faded after that first round. He wasn't able to get much going. The only takedowns he landed was in that opening round. So those 7 seconds of control time was like clinch work and things like that. Cap landed and threw more significant strikes than Nicolau in their first fight, but he landed 3 less total strikes. If you looked at like Sherdog scores, other MMA pundits, Cap was winning the fight in the second and third, and they had scored the fight for Cap. I kind of thought he won as well. A lot of fans did as well. It was a close fight, so it's gonna be a good rematch here. The odds makers are favoring Cap to get it done this time. They have him as a minus 245 favorite, with Matthias Nicolau being a plus 195 underdog. I think Cap has shown a lot of improvements since that first fight. He's really kind of come into his own. I I said since they signed Manel Cap that they signed him to be a title contender. The way he fights is super exciting. He's a knockout artist. That's what the UFC wants for this flyweight division. They want fighters that are exciting. That's why they overhauled the whole division a while back. And Cap is the type of guy that they want at the top of the division. And it seems like he's ready to be there at this point. He's got 4 fight win streak right now, and he has looked great. I think he's really settling into the octagon, and he's found what works for him in the UFC. And I think he's going to be able to get it done this time. I don't think he's going to finish Matthias Nicolau. Nicolau is tough. He's a very tough fighter, and um, he's kind of a problem really for anyone in the UFC, and he's hard to put away. So I know Brandon Royval was able to put him away, but Royval is wild as well and very unorthodox. So it wouldn't necessarily shock me to see Cap put him away because Cap has those kind of explosive moments of his own. But I see him fighting a smart fight here, landing the more powerful shots, defending against the grappling, and coming out ahead this time on the scorecards. Give me Manel Cap by unanimous decision as the official pick. It's time for the main event of the evening here between Magomed Ankalaev and Johnny Walker. This is another rematch at the top of this card, and as these two had previously fought at UFC 294. That wasn't very long ago. If you remember, this was just back in October. The fight ended very bizarrely. It's just 3 minutes and 13 seconds into the first round. Magomed Ankalaev had gone for a takedown. Walker was considered a downed opponent against the fence, and Ankalaev landed an illegal knee. The fight was stopped. A doctor came in to check Johnny Walker. The doctor asked Johnny Walker where he was, and Johnny Walker replied, "In the desert." Technically, he wasn't wrong, but it wasn't the answer the doctor was looking for, and he ended up calling the fight off. But Johnny Walker was clearly still okay to fight, and he tried to fight after that. There was a little bit of a scuffle in the cage. Luckily, Dana White got in there pretty quickly before anything could really happen and shut that down. Ankalaev is a big favorite for this fight. The odds makers currently have him at minus 455, with Walker sitting at plus 350 as an underdog. I actually picked Johnny Walker in the first pairing, and I'm actually going to pick him again here. I liked what I saw from him in that first fight, and I honestly think he should gain confidence from that first fight. To open the fight, Walker was landing some really good low kicks on Ankalaev. Those are definitely going to be a big weapon for him, especially if that fight continues. It's going to make things very difficult for Ankalaev to get his wrestling going, to move at all, even. And Walker was having a lot of success with that early. He was setting up his strikes. He actually defended that takedown well, and he wasn't on his back. He wasn't on the mat. He was actually in the process of getting up when the knee landed. I think Ankalaev is actually a bit overrated. He hasn't really ever come through in the biggest of fights. He's got that lone loss where he tapped out with 1 second left against Paul Craig. He's had a pretty solid run. He hasn't lost since then, but his biggest wins are over it's a decision over Nikita Krylov, a decision over Volkan Ozdemir, a decision over Thiago Santos, and a ground and pound victory over Anthony Smith, who everyone is calling washed at this point. And then he had the draw with Jan Blachowicz, who is the former champ and is tough, but I mean, Blachowicz is old, and everyone was talking about how Ankalaev was going to run through him. He clearly did not, fought to a split draw. And then he had this weird accidental knee that ended in a no contest. It even could have ended in a disqualification. I think Ankalaev was lucky to escape with a no contest and not a loss by disqualification. So I didn't think it was a good look for him to sort of almost be talking trash to Johnny Walker. You threw the illegal strike. It was your fault that the fight ended, and it could have been a disqualification for you. So um, I expect Ankalaev to be a bit more cautious in this fight, especially since he hasn't had a real conclusion to a fight since 2022. He had that draw with Blachowicz at the end of 2022. He didn't fight again until October of 2023 when he fought Walker, and that ended in the no contest. So his last win was in July of 2022 with that win over Anthony Smith. On the other side, Walker has shown a ton of improvement in his game. When he first came to the UFC, he was just wild. He would throw the craziest things and just look for the knockout. And most of the time, if he didn't get it, he was going to get knocked out himself. He's currently on a 3-fight win streak, though. He picked up wins over Jan Kutlaba, Paul Craig, and Anthony Smith as well. And he's really settled down in his game. I think he's shown a ton of improvements training with SBG Ireland, and I think he's going to pull this off. Those low kicks are a big weapon for him. He's got some serious power in his hands. He's got a big reach advantage as well, 7-inch reach advantage. So if Ankalaev is more cautious, it's just going to allow Walker to set things up. If he rushes in, I think Walker's going to be able to catch him that way either. He's shown solid takedown defense, and he's going to slow him down with those low kicks as well. I wouldn't be shocked if Ankalaev ends up dominating and gets the decision or even a finish because, I mean, Walker is pretty frustratingly inconsistent, but I think Ankalaev's overrated. I am going to go with the underdog in this fight in the main event. I am sticking with my original pick. I am going to pick Johnny Walker to score the knockout in round 1. All right, that is it for me and the first episode of the MMA Oracles podcast. I am the host, Jack Moon. I appreciate you listening. If you listen to the whole thing, if you could like, subscribe, and follow me, you can find me on Instagram at the MMA Oracles. Same thing on X, previously known as Twitter. I'm going to be posting more content on there. My Instagram is where I am at mostly, and you can also find all of my predictions and all of my rankings for each UFC division, as well as a lot of my other thoughts on the UFC at themmaoracles.wordpress.com. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to go ahead and just give a brief recap of the card, mainly just with my locks for the evening. John Silva versus Weston Wilson. That is a lock for the evening. John Silva is going to knock Weston Wilson out. I have no doubt about it. Bruno Fajeda is my next lock. He's going to knock out Phil Hawes, and I have Ricky Simone winning that decision over Mario Batista as well. I'm going to go ahead and throw all three of them into a parlay and see what we come out with. Let me know if you're tailing that. And for my underdog picks, I am going with Johnny Walker. I think he can get it done in the main event. I think he's got a good price tag on him at plus 350, and you can probably even find better odds if you're picking the finish. And while I'm not picking him, if you feel good about it, Taylor Lapilus, I think he can pull off that upset against Fareed Basharat. I'm still picking Fareed Basharat. That's my official pick. I'm not going back on it, but Taylor Lapilus is a live underdog. I think people are really underestimating him, and I wouldn't be shocked if he pulls it off. Also, Andrei Arlovsky, the more I looked at that fight, I'm still not going back on my pick. I think Andre Arlovsky gets. I think Waldo Cortez Acosta gets that done. But Arlovsky is the biggest test of his career, and I wouldn't be shocked if Arlovsky does it again and has that sort of career resurgence. The best fight on the card, I think, is going to be the Basharat versus Lapilus fight. That one is one I'm not going to want to miss, and I don't think you should miss either. And then the Marcus McGee versus Gaston Bolanos fight. That one's going to be wild. If it doesn't get finished, that's going to be a fight of the night for sure. So let me know what you think. Let me know your picks. If you disagree with any of my picks, let them know. Let me know in the comments. Send me a DM. We can talk about the fights. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, and follow.